Good morning. With the help of Hashem, we are learning Yerushalmi, Teruma is Pedig Vav, Halacha Aleph, and Halacha Beis. We're learning today Daf Nun Test. We're going to start on Daf Nun Ches Amid Beis, 3 lines before the bottom of the Amid by the 2 dots. We're dedicating this class, L'Refuah Shalema, to Levi Halevi ben Leah. And the first topic of today is what were to happen if a person ate Truma from a kohen who's an Amma Aretz. So normally the rule is you have to pay back to that kohen a keren v'chaimish. But as we explained, you separate chulin misukanim that are then imbued with kedushas truma, and there is a rule that you're not allowed to give truma to an Amma Aretz because from his lack of knowledge, he might or he will make that truma tamei. So how do you resolve that? That will be the first topic. We're going to go from there back to the machlokes tanoim. This is already going to be the third daf, machlokes Rabbi and Rabbi Lazar ben Rab Shimon, whether nisinosoi mikadashtoi or even only hafrashasoi mikadashtoi, and we'll see how this will be negate to our topic. And then we're going to finally focus on the last part of Halacha Aleph. The Mishnah there spoke about a Bas Yisrael who ate Truma b'shoigig. Prior to her separating and paying back the keren v'chaimish, she marries a kohen. So the Mishnah says, since she marries a kohen, even though she'll have to separate the chulin misukanim keren v'chaimish, but she gets to keep both the keren and the chaimish because now she's married to a kohen. The Gemara is going to ask, what would to happen? Same case, beginning with the same case. A Bas Yisrael eats Truma b'shoigeg. She marries a kohen. During her marriage, she did not separate any chulin for the keren v'chaimish. She gets divorced. Now she wakes up. I need to separate the keren v'chaimish. Do we say that the right that she had during her marriage is a right that she will retain? Or will we say she never separated the chulin misukanim? She never actually acquired it. Now that she's divorced, she's back to being a Bas Yisrael. Obviously, she has no children, kaihanim. Now she has to give it to a kohen. That will be the final topic of our Gemara today, prior to the new Mishnah to Halacha Beis. And Halacha Beis will speak about the following various cases. Case number 1 will be fascinating. When you have either an employer whose agreement with the workers include the employer feeding them lunch, or an innkeeper where the agreement of the guests who pay to stay in that inn is that they will be given, breakfast. What happens? It's the same. I'll just speak out the case of the employer. The employer gave them truma that no one knew about, and the workers, they ate it b'shoigig. So there's going to be a machlokes Rav Meir and the Chachamim exactly how does the keren v'chaimish make its way back to the kohen, whether it goes directly from the employer, the keren, to the kohen, or whether the workers pay the keren v'chaimish, even though they will then be compensated by the employer because he owed them lunch that he didn't give them. And that will be the first case of the Mishnah. The Mishnah from there will go to 2 scenarios, one of which we already quoted yesterday, where a person is going to eat Truma b'shoigig. There's going to be one case in the Mishnah, amazing, that you'll be chayv to pay 2 kerens and 1 chaimish. And then there'll be another case that we already learned yesterday, when the coin was magdashit, that you're going to only have to pay back 1 keren, but you're going to have to give 2 chaimishes. And we'll begin today, God willing, to explain the first case of the Mishnah. What's the underlying machlokes between Chachamim and Rav Meir as to in the case of the employer and the worker? But that's going to be a topic it's going to go deep into Daf Samach when we're going to have actually various approaches on how to understand the Mishnah. Chavra, let's go inside. Daf Nun Ches Amid Beis. Again, we are beginning 3 lines before the bottom of the Amid. Says the Gemara that if a person achal trumas chaver, if a non-kohen b'shoigeg ate the truma that belongs to a chaver, well, that's easy. Well, the Torah says you got to pay back keren v'chaimish, and in the case where you ate the truma that already belonged to a specific kohen, you give it back to that kohen. even though we learned in the Mishnah, the Chaimish, you get to choose whom to give it to, but the Keren, you have to give back to the original owner, Beseder. So, Mishalam L'chaver. In other words, that's a pshita. However, Truma Sama Aretz, if you ate Truma from a kohen who's an Amma Aretz, here, nevertheless, actually, this is a Braisa, you will be Mishalem La'am Ha'aretz. You have to pay it back to the owner. End of quote of the Braisa. Asks the Gemara, how does that work? It's prohibited for a person to give Truma Tohira to an Amma Aretz simply because they, from their lack of knowledge, and because of that, from their lack of being meticulous in the dinim of Tum and Tara, they will be matame it, or they might be matame it. So how does that work? Yeah, Pashat answers the Gemara, Daf Nun Tes, Keitzad Hu Oisa. Let me explain to you. The Braisa did not elaborate, but this is how it needs to happen. That really, Noisen Shteyem refers to the principal and to the Chaimish. You give both payments to a Chaver, not to the original owner. However, V'noitel Demei Achas Mehem, the Kohen, the Chaver, who received the Keren V'Chaimish, will pay for the Keren. To whom will he pay the Keren to? To the original owner, Am Ha'aretz. How much is this evaluated for? Demei Truma, make no mistake. In other words, Demei Truma, we already know, has less value than Chulin. So the eater, B'shoigeg, also only ate Demei Truma, if you're looking at the financial part. Point is that the actual Truma always goes to a Chaver. The Chaver who receives it will be V'noisen L'koyin Am Ha'aretz, he'll give to him. And just for the record, the Me'achas Mehen. The Me'achas Mehen refers to the Keren. Why does it only refer to the Keren? Again, because as we learned in Halacha Aleph, that the Chaimish is given to any Kohen that the eater wants. The eater doesn't want to give it to an Amma Aretz because you're not allowed to give it to an Amma Aretz. But that's the way you do it. First taste. In other words, really you pay back to a chaver, even the keren. And that chaver knows that he's getting a keren b'chaimish, but the value of the keren in Truma Tohaira is that which he will give to the original owner. So that's the first approach. Asks the Gemara, it's not good enough. Why is that not good enough? Again, going back to the Machlokes Rebbe and Ablaza Rab Shimon, Rabbi Bun Bar Chia asked, or he said, in front of Leish Lakish, Asya Commander Amar, well, if that's the case, if that's the way you understand the Braisa, then it can only go according to Rab Lazar Rab Shimon that says that even Hafrashasoi Mikadashtoi. In other words, according to Rebbe, that says that only when you give it back to the original owner is it imbued with full Kedusha, prior to which you don't even have kapara. So this solution that we gave, L'chora, doesn't go according to Rabbi. But command the Amar that only, it gets some Kedusha when you're mafresh it. But when is it imbued with full Kedusha? When you give it, the Nasan. Matonose mikadashtoi. You get the problem. And here you're not giving it back to the original kohen. So another nuance. You can say, well, you're giving it to any kohen. No, you have to give it back to the original kohen. If you're not giving it back to the original kohen, it's never invested with full kedushas truma, and therefore the kapara is not complete. The financial restitution is complete, but the kapara is not complete. Daf Nun Tes. Now, Rabbi Bun Bar Chia himself saw a solution. Unless Beloy Kain, Einot Tzarech Zekiah. Now, Zekiah would be a solution. What's the meaning of Zekiah? Zekiah means that even if you did not appoint me to be your shliach, but if I do something on your behalf, if it's only a benefit to you, if there's no downside to you, then I acquire it for you. Unless the Kohen Chaver who receives is doing it on behalf of the Am Ha'aretz, then it's as if the Am Ha'aretz received it, and then yes, it will be imbued with the full Kedusha of Truma. But that's not the words that the Gemara said on top of the Amid. The Gemara says, Keitzar hu oisa. He says that you give it, l'shneim, there was no mention of Zechiah. So Amar Lei Reish Lakish agreed to Rabbun Bar Chia But he said that's really what has to happen. That according to Rabbi, that for the Braisa to work according to Rabbi, b'mezaka al yedei achar, indeed that there was a zechiyah. In other words, what really happens if you use zechiyah, when the kohen chaver receives the keren, who does it belong to? The Am Haaretz, which needs to happen. Then the kohen chaver buys it off him. It's not pshat the way we said the words that you give it to the kohen chaver, and the kohen chaver pays him financial restitution. It's actually as if it was given to the owner, the Am Haaretz. It wasn't given to the Am Haaretz. It was given on a chaver on behalf of the Am Haaretz. But who owns it? The Am Haaretz. It's perfect. And now the kohen chaver buys it off him, or he appeases him. So the bottom line is that the Braisa stands, and even Rabbi will agree, when you follow all of these steps, that this is the proper way of paying back the truma, keren v'chaimish, when you ate it from a Am Haaretz.
So just to be clear, could I ask you a question on that? We're saying that when you give it to the kohen chaver, or you're giving it to the Am Haaretz, but the chaver is basically getting it. Yep. That is 100% in the benefit of the Am Haaretz, whether he likes it or not?
Yes, it is. Because he had stuff taken from him, and now he's getting it back.
Yeah, what if he says, I actually want that?
Then you got a problem. In other words, not I actually want it, he actually owns it. In other words, that's what they came to. That the kohen chaver has to appease him, has to convince him, has to buy it off him. Doesn't mean Danny, that he's gonna agree. And if he insists and he doesn't agree, then he'll get it. But I think that the eater did not violate. He's being moiser to haroisav le'am haaretz. He didn't do it. He did everything he could to see to it that he gives it to a chaver. But if the owner, the Am Haaretz, insists, he's going to win.
Got it.
Moving.
So basically, the Kohen Am Haaretz, he's the one who chooses the pricing and.
No. The pricing is a market value.
Oh.
Especially then, even now, basic commodities have a market value, and market value chulin, market value demei truma. Truma had a market value of demei truma. Okay. Now, again, the last case of the Mishnah was simple. A woman, she not a kohenes, she ate truma b'shoigeg. Before her doing anything to rectify her mistake, she marries a kohen. So the Mishnah tells you a chiddush that always it's just consistent. She will always have to separate chulin misukanim. There's no way to skip that step because she has to replace. That's part of her kapara. She ate truma. She has to bring the truma back into the world. Okay, keren v'chaimish. But now that she's married to a kohen, she gets to pay herself. Guys, don't imagine that she takes it from her right hand and gives it to her left hand. The moment she's mafresh it now becomes hers. And to add another nuance that we learned yesterday, that even according to Rabbi that says matanose mekadashtoi, that was the whole beauty that we learned yesterday. In these types of cases where you end up paying yourself, means you don't end up giving it, then even Rabbi will be moida that hafrashasai mikadashtoi, so there's a full kapara. Now the Gemara is asking, lo yispika l'shalem, what happens if she didn't pay, which means she did not even separate chulin misukanim, because the moment she does that, it's paid. She was married. She ate it before she was married. While she was married, there was always the potential of her separating and owning it. She never separated anything. And then she got divorced. Achen is garsha. Now the question will be, since she previously owned, let's say these words, guys, while she was married, she owned the monetary rights in that which she would have separated. Perhaps she retains those rights or not. Is our rights something substantial enough for you to acquire or to own? That's really the question. So answers the Gemara, come and see. We're going to make our initial comparison to answer this question this comparison will be refuted. But what is the comparison? If a woman had, prior to getting married, the same case, she had meiser. I just, for the record, guys, meiser doesn't only mean meiser. She had truma or meiser. Now, it means two things. This is very important. She actually had truma or meiser, or she had tevel, from which from it you have to separate the trumas or meisers. Same scenario. And then she gets married to a kohen. Before her marriage, the trumas or meisers was something that she would have to give to a kohen or to a Levi. And guys, just for the record, meiser can be given to a kohen because kohen is from the tribe of Levi. Keep on learning that. Or she had tevel. So she knew that when she'll make the separation, she'll have to give it to someone else. She marries. Now, same rule. She has to separate the trumas u'maisres from the tevel, but after she separates it, she gets to keep it. Which, by the way, is a rule by any kohen. Just to know, any kohen who has produce, the kohen has to separate the trumas u'maisres, but then he gets to keep it. Not only the trumas and the maisres. He can say, I'm a kohen, I'm from the tribe of Levi, I get to keep it. Same thing. So she gets married. She didn't separate the tevel yet, but if she would have done it, she would have kept it because she married a kohen, and then she gets divorced. Same thing. The Gemara is taking it as a given that in this case, even though she's now divorced, she has to separate the trumas u'maisres, and she keeps it. Because since during the marriage she owned the monetary rights of the trumas u'maisres, she owns it already, she retains it. Now, it's avada, of course, if she actually had the meiser, or if she had the truma, that for sure she keeps. I'm not talking about chevra. People are thinking, but when you get divorced, there's a division of, we're not going into that detail. If that fell into her lap.
Perpetuity?
Yeah.
Just keep those rights in perpetuity.
Vlad,
that's the new. I'm asking if that's the assumption.
That's an assumption, and that's the halacha. But Vlad, it doesn't mean that her new produce forever she's going to separate and keep. No, it means that which she owned, the tevel that she owned while she was married. This is important. Okay. So now, by the way, we're not challenging that. So the Gemara is saying, okay, just like by Maisres, not only Maisres that was already Maiser, because then you can't compare one case to the other. Even tevel, nothing was separated yet. But since while she was married, had she separated the truma, she would have kept it, even though she didn't separate it. Even though she got divorced and she separates the trumos, after she gets divorced, she keeps it. So therefore, the Gemara says, same thing, that since while she was married, had she designated chulin for the repayment of the ken and the chayme, she would have kept it, even though she did not separate the chulin misukanin. But she retains that right, even though she got divorced. And whenever it is that she chooses to do tshuva and to pay the keren v'chaimish, that would only mean separate keren v'chaimish, but keep it. Says the Gemara, this is pure Gemara logic. You cannot compare one case to the other. I love this. Chavre, this is mamash a gift that God gave us, this type of logic. And what is the difference between the case of tevel and the case of someone who ate truma b'shoigig? I'll say it by heart. When I own tevel, let's say I'm the woman, I own the tevel. In this tevel is the truma isumaisres. I'm not saying that I know which apple will become truma, that I don't know. But you take truma isumaisres from that which she owned when she was married. So during her marriage, she already had in her possession that which will become Trumas U'Maisres. During her marriage, the halacha would be she gets to keep it. So we say that even though she got divorced, she doesn't lose those rights. If a woman, she ate Truma, from where does she separate the Keren V'Chaimish, Aviv? From Chulin Misukanim. Now let me ask you a question. Did she own the chulin misukanim from which she'll separate when she was married? We don't know. It's irrelevant. You know why it's irrelevant? Because if I eat truma today, b'shoige, God forbid, and I wake up 10 years from now to pay, a woman, she was single, she got married, she got divorced, and the day in 10 years from now, I buy new chulin to use for the tshuva. Is it okay? Of course. In other words, the chulin misukanim, which eventually will become hers if she would have done it while she was married, she doesn't necessarily even own. She only owns the rights, but there's nothing tangible connected to it. Unlike Tevel. That's the difference. That's the Gemara's to say you can't compare one case to the other. Tamon over there, Maisrois are Misuyamim. Maisers Misuyamim means that the portions of Trumais and Maisers are already defined, meaning it's already in her possession. That's the case. She owned Tevel before her marriage. Then she gets married. Then she gets divorced. During her marriage, she already owned the item which will become Trumas or Maisers, even if she didn't separate it. But it's already a Davar Mesuyam. It's something physical in her possession. Not yet as Truma, but in her possession. But Amach over here, Truma Eino Mesuyemes. The Truma is not defined, meaning, guys, it could be that she's going to end up after the divorce. It could be. After she got divorced, she's going to end up using chulin that she had while she was married. That could be. But it doesn't have to be that way. That's the point. So therefore, even if she does it with chulin that she owned, it doesn't work that way. I have a debt, if I ate Truma B'Shoigeg, to pay back Keren V'Chaimish from chulin Misukanim. Prior to me doing it, no chulin is married to that. I don't have to own the chulin when I sinned. Like I said, I can buy new chulin on the day that I'm doing it. A chulin that was not even in the world. So you cannot compare one case to the other. It's too theoretical. It's too abstract. It's just a right. So you can't compare it to Maisres. The Gemara accepts this refutation. Don't compare it to Maisres, but we will compare it to a din that we learned yesterday of the Petach HaMoir, which will be an exact comparison. Says the Gemara, Ma Dami Law, you're right. What could I compare it to? The point will be that the woman retains the rights. I can't use Maisres as a source, but I could use the din of Pitrei Chamoiros. So let me go to the same scenario, and I'm going to have to add the same detail. A kohen who has a chamoir, male firstborn donkey, born into his possession, is bechlal not chayiv to do anything. Unlike produce that we mentioned. If I'm a kohen and I own land, and I grow produce, I have to separate trumais, even though I get to keep it. So when we're speaking about Pitrei Chamoiros, we're speaking about a woman prior to marriage, like in our Mishnah. In our Mishnah, prior to marriage, she owned donkeys. And, by the way, the firstborn can be a female, but the first one was a male. Petach Chamoir. What's the obligation? Exchange it on a goat or a lamb and give that to a kohen, or decapitate. She had that obligation. Then she goes ahead and she gets married. What is the din? The din is that she has to make the exchange. You have to make the exchange if you don't want to decapitate. But since she's married to a kohen, she gets to keep the lamb. What happens if this woman during her marriage did not make that redemption? She had a 2-day marriage. She got married, she got divorced. The din is a fact that even though she didn't do it while she was married, when she gets divorced, if she gets, God forbid, if she gets divorced, she has to make the redemption and she still keeps the lamb. Because since if she would have done it while married, she would have kept it, she retains those rights. Now here it's the same exact thing. Because if I have a chamoir born into my property, what lamb am I going to use for its redemption? Any lamb. A lamb that I own, I can decide to do it late. It's a mitzvah, do it ASAP. I can decide to do it in a month, and I can buy a lamb in a month from someone else. Same thing. The lamb that's going to be used to make the pidyon is not a davar mesuyim. Doesn't have to be a davar mesuyim. And nevertheless, the halacha over there is that since during marriage, had she done the redemption, she would have kept it. When she gets divorced, whenever she chooses to make the redemption, whether with animals that she owned while she was married, whether she acquires new animals, whether she was gifted an animal, makes no difference. She gets to keep it. That's a gewaldige comparison. Bottom line is that a person can acquire a right even on that which is not yet mesuyam. This topic is not agreed in Talmud Bavli. And that's why many people hear this, they know something is problematic with that. Because we do have another rule, and that is that you cannot acquire a davar shaloi bala olam. In other words, rights, just rights, right? If I sell you the rights to the produce of my tree, there's no such a thing in halachically. If I sell you the tree for its fruits, so then you are acquiring a tangible, a davar shabala olam. This is important. But it's good. We're learning Talmud Yerushalmi. And again, it's a given. Like, what's the source that this is the halacha by Peter Rechem? The Gemara doesn't have to bring. It was already accepted. Now that we have this accepted rule, this unwritten rule of Peter Chamoir, now we make a gavaldik comparison to the case of our Mishnah. And yes, this woman, after she gets divorced, will retain the rights. She always will be chayiv to separate keren v'chaimish, and then she gets to keep the keren v'chaimish. Now, of course, she's not a kohen; she can't eat it. Doesn't matter. She'll sell it to any kohen of her choice. B'demei truma l'chayim. That was the siyum of halacha aleph. And now we're going to start halacha beis. The first case of the Mishnah will be discussed a lot in next year. Hopefully, we'll begin with this discussion today. The scenario of the Mishnah, again, you have to just get an intro. Not every employer is obligated to feed their workers during their time of work. But if that is the agreement, that's the case of the Mishnah. Then they're chayiv. We actually learned a lot that there were certain times, certain types of work that all the employer paid for salary was the food that they ate for lunch. Nebach, imagine. It doesn't matter whether he's also giving them money. We're speaking about a case where the employer, part of his obligation is to give them food. Or we're speaking about an innkeeper. This is something that we are familiar with. Not in the Chutz La'aretz, everything is not kosher, most cases here, but I'm talking about you go to the Holy Land, what's the big yichus? That you get a breakfast. It's not a free breakfast. It's included, it's when you're paying to stay in the hotel, included in that is a meal. We're speaking about a scenario where the innkeeper is chayiv. That was the agreement, to give them a meal. What happened was, b'shoigeg, the employer, the innkeeper, fed the workers or the guests truma. And they ate it. B'shoigeg. There is a machlokes amongst the achronim. Vadai, the ones who ate it. I'm just going to speak out one case because it's the same. The workers who ate it b'shoigeg. Does it have to be that the employer also gave it b'shoigeg? Maybe the same would be if he gave it to them b'mezid, because the eater is the one that's chayiv. B'chlal ein shliach ledvar aveda. There's no such a thing that I sin and you are penalized. That's in general. Specifically, if the sin involved me getting hana'ah, can't be that I was the one that got hana'ah, I ate, and you're going to be penalized. In other words, the violator is the worker. So what would you think? Who has to pay back to the kohen, the owner, the keren v'chaimish? You would say the worker. 1 second. But the employer was supposed to give them lunch. He ended up not giving them lunch. So the owner has to give them lunch. But we'll see it's a machlokes in the Mishnah. So let's read it inside. Hamachal es poyalov, or ve'es means or, either or ve'es oirchav truma. They ate it b'shoigig. Perhaps the employer, the innkeeper, was also a shoigig. Perhaps a mezid. We'll leave that machlokes not for right now. So says the Mishnah, Rav Meir says, listen to what happens. Who mishalem es hakerem? The employer. The employer is the one that pays the kohen, not the value. He gives them chulin, misukanim. They ate an apple. Get an apple and give it back to the kohen. And then it will be imbued now with the, kedushas truma. Amazing. We separate. Vehain, but the ones who ate, the workers, are going to be the ones that pay the chomesh. The logic of all this, we're going to get in the Gemara many different approaches, but before we didn't even finish, these are only the words of Rav Meir. No. That the ones who sinned, hain, they meaning the workers, they meaning the guests, they have to pay the keren v'chomish. They give the food. They have to separate the keren v'chomish and they give it to the owner. Now they have a claim against the employer. The agreement was, you're going to give me lunch. Well, you gave me lunch, but the lunch, I'm being penalized. They're never going to get back the chomish. The chomish they're not going to get back. But the owner, the employer, mishalem lahem demei seudasan, will pay for them the value, the money of what he should have spent on them. Now, is there a bottom line financial difference between Rav Meir and the Chachamim? When you read the Mishnah, it's not so clear. It will become clear in the Gemara. But before we get to if not everyone will agree that there is a financial nafkamina, because you can argue there's no financial nafkamina. In other words, the workers, they're losing the chomish. Don't forget, no one says that the owner has to compensate them for the chomish. It was a shoygig, and the one who ate it is the one that has to do the kapara. Is there a difference whether the workers go out of pocket and they buy the food and then they get it back from the owner, whether the owner goes? Maybe yes, maybe not. Even if not, we have to still understand. So what's underlying this machlekes? Again, we're going to have many approaches. Well, God willing, we'll learn one today. We have enough time. Okay, so that's the first case in the Mishnah. The turning Chadra to Daf Nun Tes Amud Beis. We're good? We're good. Now this, we already mentioned part of this yesterday. We only mentioned the second part, not the first part. And I know that people did mention about Genev and Kefil. Now it's very clear. Maybe we got ahead of ourselves. If I said something wrong, I stand corrected for sure. Hagoynef truma v'lo yachal. Don't forget, my friends, that there is a general rule, not by Gezela, not if a person in your face, God forbid, robs from you. There he doesn't have to pay kefil. But when they speak about a ganaf is someone who doesn't want to be caught, certainly not by the person from whom he's stealing. He does it in a hiding way. And the Torah says that unless he admits his crime before he was found guilty, that a ganef is penalized by having to pay back the principal and double. Now, we never thought about that, even though I think, Danny, someone mentioned this yesterday. When someone eats truma, there are two problems here. Yes, there is the eating of the truma, I'm not a kohen, but then there is a geneva part, if there is a geneva part. So let's speak it out. That normally, if there's a geneva part, first he took it, and then he ate it. So hold on, says the Mishnah, that when a person does the first act of hagoynev truma, and he didn't yet eat it, whether he will or not, we'll see in a moment, he should know the first thing that happens is mishalem tashlume kefil. Now, how do you evaluate the kefil? Don't forget that kefil is a financial penalty. Truma, again, when I steal something, if I have what I stole be'en, I give it back. But I have to pay kefil. So how do I evaluate the kefil? Not the mei chulin. I didn't steal chulin. I stole truma. Lesser. The mei, if it got destroyed, not that I ate it, it got destroyed, then both the keren and the kefil is evaluated on the tmei truma. So mishalem tashlume kefil, the mei truma. That's clear. Now, what were to happen? The guy stole it, but the story didn't end there. Now he ate it. This is Gavaldik. If I said yesterday that he only has to pay keren v'chaimish, I stand corrected. Actually, the Mishnah says, since prior to eating it, he was chayv to pay kefil, the end will be he's going to pay 2 kerens and 1 chaimish. But here, it's going to be more complicated, because the keren v'chaimish as a penalty for eating truma has to come from what? From chulin misukanim, not the cheaper demei truma. So says the Mishnah, Achalo, now mishalem shnei keronim v'chaimish. And how do you get to that? In other words, I'm liable for the theft if I was the one that did it, God forbid. I am liable for keren v'chaimish. Now, one thing we don't say, Aviv, we don't say he has to pay 3 kerens, right? He has to pay kefil, and now they ate it, pay him. That we don't say. One is used for both. One is used for both. So how do you do it? So let me deal with the second sin. The second sin is you ate truma. Why am I beginning with the second sin? Because since I ate truma, and as we learned until now, that the penalty of paying has to come from chulin, so the keren v'chaimish, which is for the eating of the truma, is min chulin. That could be used as one of the 2 of the kefil, even though it's more than it, but it doesn't matter. You know, in 200, you have 100. If I only would have had to pay kefil, both the principal and the kefil would have been the cheaper amount. The keren v'chaimish is the more expensive amount, so be it. But in the more expensive, you have the cheaper. So at least we are counting the keren v'chaimish as one of the 2 of the kefil. But now I owe the other one. The other one, I only have to pay the Dei Truma. The keren, the second keren, I'm going to pay the Mei Truma. In other words, the Mishnah is giving you an anomaly that you can do one act of eating Truma, and instead of you be trying to pay keren v'chaimish, you have to pay 2 keranim. Get the right digduk over here, right? That's the words of the Mishnah. Yeah. Shnei keranim and a chaimish. Now we have another scenario where you do one act of eating, you only pay 1 keren and you have 2 chaimish, and that we learned yesterday, and that is that a kohen had truma. Kohen didn't eat it. The kohen decided to be magdash it. So now this food has in it 2 kedushas truma. On top of that, this kedushas hegdish. When a person b'shoigeg eats something from hegdish, that's called me'ilah. There's no kefil, but there's another penalty of keren v'chaimish. Here, you do not say 2 kerens and 2 chaimishes. We don't say 2 keranim and chaimish. Zoisloi, ganaf, trumas, hegdish, va'achala. This is amazing. You pay 2 chumshin because you ate truma, you ate hegdish. Each one demands a penalty of chaimish, but you only pay 1 keren. Why is that? Because there is a rule that the moment something becomes hegdish, there is no din of kefil. Kefil is only between ish re'eyu, commoners, not by hegdish. She'ein behegdish tashlume kefil. And since there's no tashlume kefil, what I stole was 1 item, was keren, was the apple. What do you mean you pay 2? There's no din of kefil. But since the apple has in it kedushas truma, the chaimish you have to pay for the truma, and you pay the chaimish for the hegdish. Beautiful.
Wait, yes, that doesn't have the rule of Omesh?
No, we did not say that yesterday.
And what about the case where you?
We said that there is no rule of swearing. Even though the Torah speaks about whenever I deny I owe money, the Torah gave 5 examples. You know what example the Torah did not give? If I stole from hegdish and I denied that I stole from hegdish. That's another din, that you have to pay keren v'chaimish and hasham gezelis. That you don't have by hegdish. But the Mishnah doesn't even mention that case.
Oh, sure.
That was the answer. Why not find the case where you have to pay 3 chaimish? Very good. And now the final part of the Mishnah. Ein mishalmin min haleket u'min hashikcho min hapeo min hahefker. This is huge. Now let's read inside the Marafulda. Marafulda is actually towards the top of the Amid. 8 lines from the top of the Amid. Ein mishalmin min haleket u'min hashikcho min hapeo. Before we come to hefker, he says the following: that anything that was never obligated to have trumas u'maisra separated from it can never be used as your chulin misukanim to pay the keren v'chaimish. You would argue, why not? Why not? If I'm an ani and I took leket, I'm allowed to eat it. By the way, it is technically chulin misukanim for me. It's not trumas, it's not maisris, it's not good. Why is that? Because he brings down over here that when the Torah says that you have to pay, what's the words? V'nasan lakoyin min hakodesh, it also means you have to give to the kohen something that potentially would have been kodesh. You know what would have been kodesh? Every chulin misukanim, if it came from tevel, because anything that came from tevel, any part of it could have been the 2% of truma. Something that could have been kodesh in its origin now will become kodesh when I'm using it as the penalty of keren v'chaimish. But therefore, something that is not chayiv to be tithed at all from the beginning, which is leket, which is shikha, which is peah, which is hefker, can never become kodesh. And the goal is to use chulim misukanim, but for it to become kodesh, it cannot become kodesh because it was never from that which potentially could have become kodesh. That's din number one. Din number two, I can also not use v'loy mimaisa sheni or hegdesh shenivdu. I'm sorry. V'loy mimaisa sheni v'hegdesh shenivdu. I cannot use an item that's chulin misukanim. Now it's chulin misukanim. Now it's hegdesh shenivdu. I cannot use that. Why not? Because she'ein hegdish poide es a hegdish. This is Rabbi Meir. And I want to make it like this. I want to know, this is Rav Meir. Rav Meir holds, if you remember, how do we define Meiser Sheni? Is Meiser Sheni Mishulchan Gavoya, which is Shita of Rav Meir? Meiser Sheni is not yours. The fact that you get to eat it is because God is inviting you, so to say, to his table. Since Rav Meir holds that Meiser Sheni is not yours, everyone holds that Hegdish is not yours. While it was Hegdish, and according to Rav Meir, while it's Meiser Sheni, it's not yours to use to pay a penalty. It's not yours. On top of that, we say that even though now it is yours, since it was a time that it was not yours, it may never be used. Divrei Rav Meir. The way we just worded the explanation in Rav Meir, you would think that the Chachamim who hold that Meiser Sheni, even before you redeemed it, if you'll redeem it, is considered your property, you can be Mekadosh a woman with it, etc. You would think that the Chachamim would only argue with Meiser Sheni. The Chachamim's words are, V'chachamim matirim bo'elu. The Chachamim allow with these. And we're going to leave this for the Gemara who's going to ask, what's the these? I get that you can argue with Rav Meir vis-a-vis Meiser Sheni. Why would the Chachamim also argue with Hegdish? And if that's the case, then even if the Chachamim were to hold that Meiser Sheni, while it's Meiser Sheni is not yours, maybe the Chachamim are saying, I don't care that there was a time when it did not belong to you. Now that it belongs to you, and now that it's Chulin Misukanim, we're going to leave this final for the Gemara. And now the Gemara will begin with the first machlokes in the Mishnah. We don't have to repeat it. We just learned it. I'm just going to speak about the case of the employer. The same thing is with the innkeeper. And the Gemara wants to understand, Ha Rabbi Meir Amr Mishalmin, and the Rabbanan say Mishalmin. Bottom line is, the workers are losing over here. The Chaimish, they won't even get compensation for. The only machlokes is, it seems like, between Rav Meir and the Chachamim, who has to pay, who has to give it directly to the Kohen. The Gemara is asking, my beinein means what's underlying the machlokes, and is there actually going to be a financial difference between Rav Meir's approach and the Chachamim's approach? And the first approach that we'll learn today, which is Rabbi Yochanan, holds, no, there won't be any financial difference, but the reason why they are arguing who has to pay back to the owner, to the kohen, is based on the following other machlokes between Rav Meir and the Chachamim, which is great. And this is so important when many people here have workers, and many times, I know my father, he was chayiv to give his workers lunch. That was part of and there was a dining room, and that's a whole big halachic issue. How do you serve people treif, even though they were goyim? Are you allowed to buy treif? It's not so simple. So the main question is, when a person has this arrangement with workers, are they obligated to give them the money that they need to buy the food, which is what my father made up with them? Clear. That resolves all the problems. You give them the money. What they do with the money is on them. You gave them money. You never gave them food. Or when an employer has to feed part of the salary, or all of the salary is to feed, the pshat is that the employer is chayiv to give them the food. The simplest nafkamina is who has to go through the trouble of buying it, and who has to go through the trouble making it. But there's going to be other consequences as well, including here. Let's read it inside. The difference will be, how do we understand that obligation? Let me just read the words inside quickly. I know it's late. Number one, there's a couple of steps. I'll go through all the steps. Rav Meir holds that whenever there's disagreement, the chiyuv is not money. He cannot get away by giving them cash, unless they agree, but the chiyuv is to give them food. Now, I want to say something else. I want to say these words. Since the employer, Rav Meir, must provide the actual food, we view it as if he's selling it to them. So he has to give them the food. Now, let me ask you a question. When I sell an item that is not mine, what's the din? If I sell you an item that's not mine, you know what happens? That item itself goes back to the real owner. And you know what I have to give to you? Not money. I have to replace the item. I sold you an item, in this case, the chacham, you have to give food. I cannot get away with, Aviv, I'm sorry, it belonged to someone else. I'll give you back your $100. You'll say, no. I bought the cup. The owner gets the cup back. The owner of the cup gets the cup back. I have to give you the cup, not the money. So therefore, the employer, Rav Meir, has to replace the food. There's only one nafkamina, which is Rabbi Mendel. He does not give the food to the workers. You know why he doesn't give the food to the workers? Because this food, which is chulin misukanim, this food will become imbued with kedushas truma. The pshat is that the employer gives the food directly on behalf of the workers. But the owner has to give the food, daf samach. The Rabbanan hold that ikar su'uda lepoyalim, that the agreement only demands for the owner to give them cash for lunch, the value of the lunch. He's not chayiv to give the food, so he doesn't have to replace the food, which is exactly what the Chachamim say. So the eaters have to give the food back to the kohen, Keren v'chaimish, and the employer gives them the money, not for the chaimish, he gives them the money for the food.